Welcome to Experience Talks, the radio magazine for the experienced listener. I'm Cynthia Friedlob. We are returning today with stage and screen star George Takei for part 2 of his interview about the Los Angeles premiere of the Broadway musical Allegiance. This powerful play was inspired by his own family's harrowing experiences during World War II, when 120,000 Japanese Americans were forced to abandon their homes and all of their possessions and were incarcerated in camps simply because they were of Japanese descent. In the musical, Mr. Takei plays the pivotal roles that he originated on Broadway. You can see this uplifting testament to the power of the human spirit at the Aratani Theater in Little Tokyo through April 1st. Go to experiencetalks.org for details. Now here's George Takei with host John Semper Jr. for part 2 of this conversation.
Let's talk about the loyalty questionnaire, which was created in the early months of 1943. Everyone in the camp over the age of 17 was required to sign this questionnaire, and it caused a tremendous amount of difficulty within your family, and specifically for your mother.
To all Japanese Americans, because right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, young Japanese Americans, like all young Americans, rushed to the recruitment center to volunteer to serve in the U.S. military. This was an act of patriotism. Their patriotism was answered with a slap on the face. They were denied military service and categorized as enemy aliens. It was crazy. We were neither. We're not the enemy. We're volunteering to serve, possibly die for this country, and to call them enemies is absolutely insane. And we were not aliens. We were born here, raised here, educated here. We were Americans volunteering to serve, and they categorized us as enemy aliens. But a year into imprisonment, the government realized there's a wartime manpower shortage. And here are these people that they could have had, that they categorized as enemy aliens. How to justify drafting them out of the internment camps. And they came up with an even crazier solution, a loyalty questionnaire. A year into imprisonment, a year after they impoverished us, took everything away. My father lost his business, our home, our bank account, everything, and they want and imprisoned us, and they want a loyalty questionnaire answered. There were 2 questions that were the most egregiously insulting questions. Question 27 asked, "Will you bear arms to defend the United States of America?" My mother had 3 children, one an infant, my baby sister, not even a year old. She turned 1 in Arkansas. And she was being asked to abandon us and bear arms to defend the nation that was imprisoning her. It was crazy. 28 was even more egregious. It was insulting. It was one sentence with 2 conflicting ideas. It asked, "Will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan?" We're Americans. We never even thought of a loyalty to the Emperor. And for the government to assume that there is an inborn racial loyalty to the Emperor was insulting. And so if you said no, meaning I don't have a loyalty to the Emperor to forswear, that no applied to the first part of the very same sentence. Will you swear your loyalty to the United States? If you answered yes, meaning I do swear my loyalty to the United States, then you were confessing that you had been loyal to the emperor and now were prepared to forswear that loyalty and re-swear your loyalty to the United States. And the amazing thing, as insulting as those questions were, the amazing thing was thousands of young men and women bit the bullet, swallowed the bitter taste, and went from behind those barbed wire fences to fight for this country. The women were put into the WACs. The men were put into a segregated, all-Japanese-American unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They were sent to the battlefields of Europe, and they were literally used like cannon fodder. They were sent out on the most dangerous missions in waves after waves. They sustained the highest combat casualty rate per capita of any other unit in the Second World War. And they fought with incredible courage, outright heroism. And they came back the single most decorated unit of the entire Second World War, which still is operative. And I think 21 of the veterans of the 442nd bear or have borne the Medal of Honor, the highest military recognition the nation can grant.
Mm-hmm. And it's also because of their actions that after the internment, after the camps were closed, they were very symbolic in the Japanese community being welcomed back into society, the fact that they had been so brave and so...
But the welcome came in dribs and drabs. Yeah. Initially, when we came back, the hostility was still intense. We couldn't find housing. Our first home was on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. And to us kids, that was the most horrific part of the internment, because at least in imprisonment, we got used to the routine, the regimentation, the strict order of imprisonment. On Skid Row, it was sheer chaos, sirens shrieking all the time, day and night, ugly, smelly, scary people staggering about or leaning on walls or sprawled on the sidewalk. Our room would suddenly light up red at night with police lights flashing. It was terrifying. And I started school, and the teacher kept calling me Jap boy or Jap kid. I mean, that stung. Why did she hate me so much? Mrs. Rugen was her name. I'll never forget her name. Dumpy lady with the hair tied up in a gray bun on top. But then as an adult, I think back and, maybe her husband was in the Pacific Theater. Maybe she had a son. But I'm a kid.
Sure.
Her student. Yeah. I had nothing to do with the Second World War.
Yeah.
But that racism was still intense.
This is the thing that I think Allegiance did so well, was that in the short amount of time that any musical is allotted on stage, you showed so many different sides and so many different shades. And without aggressively pointing the blame at any one particular person or any one particular group of people, you demonstrated both the failings and also the circumstances that so many people in so many different groups found themselves in. I thought that was a miraculous balancing act.
Well, I think Allegiance, for the first time, tells the whole story.
Yes.
Because the story of the heroism of the 442nd has been well spotlighted. But there is another and a very real part of the internment experience that most people don't know about. And it's the heroism of those that stood on American principles.
Right.
They were the ones that said, I'm an American and I will fight for my country, but I will fight as an American. If I can report to my hometown draft board with my family back home, I would be like any American. and I would have something to fight for. I will fight as an American, but I will not go as an internee, leaving my family in imprisonment, to put on the same uniform as the sentries guarding over my family. I will fight as an American. This was a gutsy stand, challenging the full might of the United States government. But it was an American stand, and it was a courageous stand. And for that, they were tried for draft evasion, found guilty, and transferred from an internment camp into Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. And they did hard time behind those tall concrete walls. As an American, standing still, doing hard time, as an American, for American principles. And I consider them just as heroic as those that battled on the European battlefields. And that's the story, that's the other half of the story of the whole internment experience that most people don't know about. In fact, younger Japanese Americans don't know the full story, because after we did Allegiance in San Diego and Broadway, young Japanese Americans would come backstage to tell me that their family was incarcerated too, and I said, "Oh, which camp?" They're blank. They just know that their parents or grandparents were in camp, but because they didn't talk about it, they don't know the name of the camp. Yeah. And I asked them then, where was it? Was it in Idaho? Was it in Wyoming? Was it Arizona? Was it Arkansas? They don't know a thing about it. For understandable reasons. Because the internment was so painful and humiliating, and they felt guilty about the whole experience for unfathomable reasons, and they didn't talk about it. So young Japanese Americans, because the 442nd story has been well publicized, they think that's the story. No, that's only half the story. We, for the first time, on the stages of America, are telling the full story of the damage, the fracturing of the Japanese American community by this internment experience.
And you tell it magnificently. Just so that you know, I'm enjoying this interview so much that we'll break it up into two parts, and we're gonna do two shows because I don't want to stop. I hope you don't mind. I want to get back to the questionnaire and your mother, because that was responsible for you actually ending up at a second camp. Can you talk about that briefly?
Well, my parents were categorized as no-nos, disloyal, because of the two no's on question 27 and 28. And we were transferred from the Arkansas camp, Rower, to Tule Lake, the camp in Northern California, which became the biggest camp of all of the 10 internment camps. Tule Lake, 18,000. And this was called the segregation camp for those that were categorized as disloyal by the loyalty questionnaire. 3 layers of barbed wire fence and a half a dozen tanks patrolling the perimeters. I mean, how outrageous, how irrational, how stupid it is for the government. Those tanks belonged on battlefields, not preventing escape by people who were goaded into outrage by the wave after wave. First the curfew, and then the freezing of our bank, and then our incarceration, and then the loyalty questionnaire. And then to call them disloyal when all they're doing is standing up for their American principles, American rights. And so we were in that, and it was a much harsher camp, Tule Lake was. But some young men became radicalized. Their attitude was, all right, you're going to consider us the enemy? By gum, You're going to see the kind of enemy you have to contend with. And I remember waking up in the mornings to these young men who were jogging around the block, exercising, keeping themselves fit so that they can rise up when Japan lands on the United States. They were radicalized they were created by the government's outrages. And they would jog around using the Japanese cadence. And I heard the cadence, washoi, 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 as they jogged around the block. And they would end their jog with banzai, banzai, banzai. And then they would scatter. And then the jeeps would come roaring in to try to find who they were. But they had scattered, into the barracks, and they couldn't identify them. But their reaction was, that night, they would drag young men out of the barracks. And because it was so arbitrary, they dragged a lot of innocent young men out of the barracks. And they were imprisoned in a concrete cell block that were built by the internees. The internees were forced to build the what we call the stockade, and they were imprisoned there, and they were brutalized in the stockade. But my father, being the block manager there, he had to go to the camp command and speak for the innocent ones that they had dragged out. And because they were unrelenting, he'd have to organize a delegation. And he went to the camp command and finally get the innocent ones released from the cell block. It was outrage after outrage. And the final culminating outrage was in the middle of the war. Congress passed a law allowing American citizens, under the duress of the series of assaults on their dignity, to renounce their citizenship, American citizenship. Many of those young men did, because they were radicalized. But to goad us even more, after they passed that bill, then they threatened, this is in the middle of the war, 1944, they threatened to close down Tule Lake. There are the rednecks out there. There were shots fired at the Quakers were supportive of the internees. There was a Quaker bookstore in Pasadena, Vroman's, and I still buy my books there at Vroman's. They used to come drive out once a month to the Manzanar camp to donate a bookload of books. Every month they came. But on one trip, they were shot at by rednecks, and the people of Manzanar said, "Well, that's it. They're not going to come anymore." Next month, on that same date, they drove in with a bookload of, so there were rednecks out there taking pot shots at people that were coming into the camp, as those are Jap lovers. Well, if they closed down Tule Lake,
you would have been exposed to
we
all
would
that.
have been exposed to all that.
Yeah.
The only way to keep it was to force the government to keep that operation going. And the radicals said, if enough people renounce their citizenship, we'll force the U.S. government to keep, because the irony was, what was the barbed wire fences that were imprisoning us were also protecting us from those rednecks.
Right.
And so in order to keep the family safe, my mother did a radical thing. She renounced her American citizenship. She was born in Sacramento, California. She was an American, but she was forced by the government to renounce her citizenship so that they wouldn't close down Tule Lake. And I owe who I am today to one man, an extraordinary, courageous, and effective attorney, Wayne Collins. He was the ACLU attorney in San Francisco, and incidentally, the National ACLU stayed neutral on the issue of internment. Only one ACLU chapter, the San Francisco chapter, took a stand opposing the internment. And the attorney of that San Francisco chapter, Wayne Collins, was the only one who would touch Japanese-American issues. and he came to the rescue of people like my mother. And there were some that literally were on board a ship to deport American citizens to Japan. I mean, you can't use the word deport. They were born here,
right,
but they were already on a ship. And Wayne Collins went running up the gangplank and got the stays on their deportation and said, "You, Jack Yamada, and you, Bill Takahashi, come with me. I have your stays here," and got them off the ship.
It's amazing.
Fortunately, my mother and us never got to that point.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had been on one of those ships, I would have gone to a devastated, defeated, war-torn country. I may not be speaking English today, and I may be a very screwed-up person growing up in Japan.
Let me ask you, in conclusion, talk to me about the word gaman and what it means to you. It factors prominently in Allegiance. What does it mean to you?
It means fortitude. It means to bear it with dignity and continue to be who you are. And, we made a musical out of it, and most people say, the singing and dancing in a musical about the internment of Japanese Americans, but they are all true organic aspects of gaman. Gaman means to have the strength to live life despite harsh circumstances, to find beauty in ugly situations. From the Arkansas camp, my father found a cypress tree that had its roots snaking in and out of the muck, and he went out and cut it off and boiled it, peeled the barks off, and it's now in my study. It's a beautiful piece of architecture.
And your character in the play is able to actually create a garden out of this horrible
the
soil.
Wyoming desolate wasteland.
Yeah.
And many Japanese Americans were farmers, and they found ways to coax even the most sterile soil to be productive. And so that's my character's contribution.
And that's really so symbolic of what this play is about. It's about maintaining your dignity and maintaining your sense of self amidst horrible adversity.
And to still be able to fall in love. And so we have two love stories. Fall in love under these harsh circumstances. And one, the boy, falls in love with a white nurse. And his sister falls in love with a young law student who stood on principles and defied the draft. And so we tell the story of the internment with two love stories.
You've got an amazing cast. Elena Wang and Ethan LaFong are absolutely tremendous.
Aren't they extraordinary? They're glorious voices.
They've amazing voices. They deliver fantastic performances. You have one cast member, I don't have his name here, but he sort of plays a lot of generic white characters throughout the play. He's sort of, all of the white males. I hope you give him a security detail on the way back to his car after the show.
Isn't he a wonderful actor?
He's great.
Jordan Goodsell.
And
he travels in from Orange County daily to downtown Los Angeles to play that part. And he is, at first I thought people might start sniggering. Oh, it's that guy that was the MP that's now the farmer, or is the government official, or a celebrant at a party. But he is such a compelling actor that he makes every one of those characters very real.
Absolutely.
The arrogance of the bureaucrat, eating an apple and with a brown bag lunch in front of him. Yeah. And Mike Masaoka, the apologist for the internment, begging for him to, make some time for him. He is a wonderful actor, and I hope he has a fantastic career.
He was so good, I was willing to wait out in the parking lot with a baseball bat. Thank you so much for coming and doing this interview with us. It is an amazing play. And yes, I was weeping profusely at the very end of it.
You are human.
And your performance, of course, was fantastic. It was really, I get the feeling that this is probably one of the most important things that you've ever done in your own estimation.
It is a fulfillment, and I consider Allegiance my legacy project.
Well, on that note, thank you for coming and joining us here at Experience Talks, and we wish you great success continued with it.
I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
We'd like to close part 2 of this interview with a song from Allegiance entitled Gammon. Experience Talks is produced by John Semper Jr. and me, Cynthia Friedlob, for Engage, the nonprofit that is creating community for all ages. Learn more about any of our guests and listen to previous shows on our website at experiencetalks.org. Thank you for joining us.
It will all be all right. There's a way through this night. Stay strong on this long road. We bury our pain. There's a word we will say to help get through each day. We will bear any nightmare with a simple refrain. Come on, come on. Sturdy and sure, keep faith and endure. Come on, come on. Hold your head high, carry on. Come on.
Till this life up on high, looking down, see how I am lost and exhausted, weak and ashamed.
Little baby, don't cry, hear a sweet lullaby.
Have I failed to protect you? Am I to blame? We know that there's no turning